When Margaret Lewis turned 72, she thought life would finally feel peaceful. She had retired from her teaching job years ago. Her husband Charles had worked as an engineer before his health declined, and their children were grown with families of their own. But one thing haunted Margaret in her quiet afternoons: debt. For decades she had worked hard, paid bills on time, and lived responsibly, but somehow, the weight of medical expenses, old credit card balances, and even unexpected loan offers piled up around her. Each time she checked the mailbox, she dreaded the sight of envelopes with bold letters, "Final notice" or "urgent." "Charles," she said one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with her husband, "I feel like we'll never be free from all this. They keep saying we owe more and more. What if they take away everything?" Charles, frail but steady in his wisdom, sighed and reached for her hand. "Maggie, we've given enough to this world. Maybe it's time we learn what we don't actually have to pay." That was the first step in their journey, realizing they didn't have to fight this battle alone. A week later, their daughter Rebecca insisted they meet with a financial lawyer she trusted, David Collins, a calm, middle-aged attorney who specialized in helping seniors understand debt laws. Margaret and Charles reluctantly agreed. Inside his small office, filled with shelves of heavy books and warm sunlight, David greeted them kindly. "You're not the first to feel buried under debts you may not even owe anymore," he assured them. "Many older Americans don't know their rights. Let me walk you through it." What followed was not just a legal consultation. It was a revelation that changed the Lewis family's life. David leaned forward and explained that not all debts are created equal. Some, he said, can legally be ignored, especially for seniors with limited income or certain protections. "Let me give you 6 examples," he said, "and by the end, you'll see you've been carrying a burden you don't need to." Margaret listened carefully, her notebook open, her pen shaking slightly in her hand. The first category David explained involved medical debt. "Hospitals and clinics can be aggressive," he said, "but in many states, if you have Medicare or Medicaid, and you're living mostly on Social Security, you can't legally be forced to pay everything they demand. There are protections." Margaret's eyes widened. She remembered endless bills from Charles's hospital stays, some dating back years. "So we don't have to pay all of that?" she asked cautiously. "Not necessarily," David reassured her. "Collectors may scare you, but the law often shields seniors from medical debt collections." For the first time in months, Margaret felt her shoulders loosen. The second kind of debt David described was old credit card balances that exceeded the statute of limitations. If a credit card debt is older than a certain number of years, depending on the state, it becomes unenforceable. They can call, they can write, but they cannot legally force you to pay. Charles chuckled. "So, all those calls we ignored about a card from the 1990s, we didn't do anything wrong?" David smiled. "Exactly. The law says they waited too long. You can walk away." The third debt type stunned them. Personal loans from decades ago that were never enforced by a court. David explained that many seniors carry guilt about loans they took long ago, often from banks that don't even exist anymore. If no judgment was ever made in court and years have passed, those debts may be gone. Margaret shook her head in disbelief. "All this time, I thought we were criminals for not paying every cent." "You're not criminals," David assured her. "You're just people who deserve peace." By the time David explained the fourth debt, credit card debt in a spouse's name only, Margaret felt tears well in her eyes. She had spent years fearing Charles's medical debts would wipe out their joint savings. But David clarified, if a debt is only in one spouse's name, the other may not be legally responsible after death. Collectors may try to pressure you, but the law is clear. Margaret squeezed Charles's hand. For years she had imagined being widowed and drowning in bills she didn't even create. The fifth example shocked Rebecca, who had joined them by then: student loan debt from decades ago. "Most federal student loans are forgiven at death," David said firmly. "Private lenders may act differently, but older Americans should know that if they're on fixed income, they can't take away Social Security for private student loans." Rebecca laughed bitterly. "Mom, you worked 3 jobs to pay for my college, and you still worried about old loans. All this stress for nothing." Finally, David leaned back and gave them the sixth category: zombie debts. These were debts sold and resold to collectors, often without proof. If they can't prove in writing that you owe, you can legally walk away, he said. Margaret's jaw dropped. She remembered letters from companies she had never heard of, demanding thousands. They prey on fear, David said softly. But once you know your rights, they lose their power. That night, back at home, Margaret sat on the porch with Charles. The sunset painted the sky, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped. "Can you believe it?" she whispered. "All this time, we've been living under shadows that weren't even real." Charles smiled faintly. "Knowledge is freedom, Maggie. We earned the right to rest." Over the following weeks, Margaret made calls, wrote letters, and kept every piece of advice David had given them. With each step, the weight on her chest lifted. They discovered that many of their debts were either unenforceable or irrelevant. What mattered was their peace of mind, their family, and the years they had left together. Rebecca hugged her mother one afternoon and said, "You've taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't paying everything, but knowing when you don't have to." By the end of their journey, Margaret and Charles weren't just debt-free in the legal sense, they were emotionally free. They no longer feared the phone ringing or the mailbox filling with threats. They knew their rights, and with that knowledge, they found dignity in their golden years. Their story became one they shared at community centers, church groups, and family gatherings. Seniors listened with tears in their eyes, realizing they too had been carrying invisible chains. And with each conversation, Margaret's voice grew stronger. "Never let fear guide you," she would say. "Some debts are not yours to carry. Let the law protect you. Let your life be lighter." And so, in the final chapters of their life, Margaret and Charles learned the most powerful lesson of all, that peace doesn't always come from paying everything, but from knowing what you can let go.